Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the weeds on something quite specific. The arguments for why the name Jehovah has appeared and, well, still appears in English Bible translations.
That's right. And our goal here, just to be clear, isn't about taking sides or saying one translation is definitively better.
No, not at all.
It's more about understanding the reasoning, the history, the language, the theology behind why this particular name, Jehovah, has been used. We're drawing straight from the sources we looked at.
Exactly, just understanding the arguments themselves. So maybe a good place to start is, well, a question that often comes up. If we commonly say Jesus in English, why treat the divine name differently? Let's unpack that.
Yeah, that's a really key starting point because it highlights this basic idea that names adapt when they cross languages. It happens all the time.
Okay.
Take Jesus. That name has its own journey, right? It started as Yeshua. That's the original Hebrew or Aramaic.
Right, Yeshua.
Then, when the scriptures were translated into Greek, it became Iesus. Then Latin picked it up as Isis. And eventually, through changes in pronunciation and spelling over time, we landed on Jesus in English. It's a natural linguistic process.
So applying that same logic, how does that track with the divine name, YHWH, those 4 Hebrew letters?
Well, the argument presented in our sources follows that exact same pattern. You have the Hebrew YHWH, and the pronunciation scholars often reconstruct as something like Yahweh.
Okay, Yahweh.
But just like Yeshua didn't jump straight to Jesus, Yahweh didn't just stay static. The sources suggest it went through its own evolution, particularly involving medieval Latin and German influences, which eventually led to the form Jehovah becoming common in English.
So it's the same principle at play.
Exactly the same principle. The core point being made is, if the linguistic adaptation from Yeshua to Jesus is accepted, almost without question, really.
Yeah, nobody really argues about saying Jesus.
Right. Then the adaptation from, let's say, Yahweh to Jehovah follows that same logical path. It's presented as a parallel linguistic journey.
That makes sense, laying it out like that. And building on that, the history. I mean, when you look into it, Jehovah isn't some recent thing in English Bibles, is it? It's actually got quite a long history.
Oh, absolutely. It's not recent at all. We're talking over 500 years of usage in major English Bible translations.
5 centuries?
Yeah.
Like which ones?
Well, think about William Tyndale's Bible back in 1530. He used it. Then the Geneva Bible, which was hugely popular among the Puritans. Around 1560, it's in there.
Okay.
And, of course, the big one, the King James Version of 1611. It uses Jehovah in several key places in the Old Testament.
Right, the KJV. That's significant.
It is. And it didn't stop there. Even fast forwarding to the early 20th century, the American Standard Version, the ASV from 1901, which was considered quite scholarly for its time, it used Jehovah consistently throughout the Old Testament. That tells you something about its acceptance, even in more academic circles back then.
So it's really crucial to understand this wasn't like invented by one specific modern church or group.
Yeah.
That seems to be a common misunderstanding.
That's a very important clarification the sources make. Its history is much broader and older. You find major figures of the Protestant Reformation, like Martin Luther and John Calvin, acknowledging or using forms related to it.
Really? Luther and Calvin, too?
Yes. And even within Catholicism, the sources mention a scholar named Petrus Galatinus using a Latin form related to Jehovah back in 1518. So it had a pretty wide historical footprint across different denominations.
Wow. Okay. So we have the linguistic adaptation argument mirroring Jesus and this deep historical usage. But what about the practical side? The sources mentioned a need for a distinct name. What's the issue with just using titles like Lord?
Yeah, this gets into clarity. The sources explain that ancient Jewish scribes, the Masoretes, developed a tradition out of reverence they wouldn't pronounce the divine name, YHWH.
Okay.
So when they read the scriptures aloud, they would substitute the Hebrew word Adonai, which means Lord, and they even put the vowel points for Adonai onto the consonants YHWH in the text as a reminder.
Right. I've heard about that. So how does that cause confusion in English?
Well, when translators carried that substitution over into English, often rendering YHWH as Lord, usually in all caps, and also translating the actual word Adonai as Lord, just with initial cap, you can get ambiguity.
Can you give an example?
Yeah.
Like the one from Psalms?
Psalm 110, verse 1 is the classic example. Many translations read, "The Lord said to my Lord."
Okay, yeah. The Lord said to my Lord.
Yeah.
You hear that and you think, wait, who is talking to whom?
Exactly. Is the first Lord, YHWH, talking to a human Lord, like David? Or is it YHWH talking to the Messiah, who David also calls my Lord Adonai? Without the distinct name, it's potentially confusing. You lose the specific identity of God in that interaction.
Right, so using Jehovah cuts through that specific confusion.
That's the argument. By using Jehovah, it makes it instantly clear that the first Lord is God's personal name, distinguishing it from the title Lord Adonai, applied to the second figure in the verse.
It preserves the uniqueness.
Precisely. It stops the personal name of God from just blending in with other generic titles like God, which is usually from the Hebrew Elohim or Lord from Adonai. It keeps that personal distinction sharp.
Okay, that makes practical sense. Now let's tackle the pronunciation itself. People often say Jehovah is just wrong, linguistically incorrect. How do the sources handle that?
Well, they reframe it. It's less about being absolutely wrong and more about being a conventional pronunciation, one established in the English language.
Like how we say names from other languages.
Exactly like that. The example often used is Paris. We say Paris. The French say P-R-E. Is the English way wrong? Not really. It's just the accepted English way of saying it.
Okay.
And the sources make another really vital point. Yahweh, the form many scholars prefer today, is also a reconstruction. We don't have audio recordings from ancient Israel.
Right. No ancient podcasts.
Exactly. No one alive today knows with 100% certainty precisely how ancient Hebrew was pronounced. So while Yahweh might be a more likely scholarly guess based on linguistic evidence,
It's still a guess, essentially.
it's still a scholarly reconstruction, yes. Neither Jehovah nor Yahweh can be definitively proven to be the exact original sound.
And thinking about English speakers, does Jehovah just fit better phonetically?
That's part of the argument, too. The J sound, like in Jesus or John, is very common and natural in English.
Yeah.
Whereas Yahweh, while scholars use it, could potentially be stumbled over by average English readers. You might get Yahweh or Yahweh or something else. The argument is that Jehovah flows more easily within English phonetic pattern.
Okay, so linguistic adaptation, long history, practical clarity, and it fits English phonetics. Let's shift to the theological angle. The sources mention Jesus himself. What's the connection there?
The connection drawn is that Jesus placed importance on his Father's name. The sources point to prayers, like in John 17, where Jesus says, I have made your name known, and will continue to make it known. And also, famously, in the model prayer, the Our Father in Matthew 6, hallowed be your name, meaning it should be treated as sacred, set apart.
So the idea is, if Jesus emphasized the name, shouldn't his followers?
That's the theological thrust. And this leads into the view, mentioned in the sources, often associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. If we take care to use the adapted name Jesus,
Right.
then consistency suggests we should also use the similarly adapted name Jehovah for God, rather than replace it entirely with titles.
Okay. Now, what about counter-arguments? The sources tackled a couple. What about the claim that the tetragrammaton YHWH isn't found in existing New Testament manuscripts?
Right, that's a common point. The response presented in the sources is that this absence isn't proof the name wasn't used by early Christians.
Okay, why not?
The argument is that later scribes, following a tradition similar to the one that led to replacing YHWH with Adonai in Hebrew, replaced YHWH with the Greek word kurios, meaning Lord, in the New Testament copies we have.
Ah, so a similar substitution happened in the Greek manuscripts.
That's the explanation offered. They suggest that just as scribes altered the Septuagint, that's the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, to replace YHWH with kurios, they likely did the same when copying the New Testament writings. The argument is that the original writers, and certainly early Jewish Christians, would likely have used the divine name.
Interesting. And the other counter-argument, that Yahweh is simply more accurate.
We touched on this, but the response basically circles back. More accurate is relative, since both are reconstructions to some degree.
Neither is definitively provable as the original.
Correct. And while Yahweh might reflect a better scholarly guess at the original, Jehovah has the weight of, well, centuries of actual use in English literature, hymns, and Bible translations. It has cultural and historical resonance in English.
Okay, so wrapping this all up. It seems the case for using Jehovah, based on these sources, rests on several pillars.
It does. You've got the linguistic adaptation principle, just like Jesus. You have that undeniable long history in English Bibles.
Right, the 500 plus years.
Then there's the practical clarity it brings, avoiding the Lord confusion.
Makes sense.
Plus, its suitability for English pronunciation. And underpinning it all is the theological argument about the importance of using God's personal name, citing biblical emphasis like Psalm 83.18 or Isaiah 42.8, where God explicitly identifies himself using the name.
I am Jehovah. That is my name.
Exactly. So maybe the final thought to leave listeners with, drawn from these arguments, is this.
Yeah.
If you comfortably use Jesus in English, recognizing it as an adaptation of Yeshua that makes the name accessible, then the logic presented here suggests extending that same acceptance to Jehovah as a similar historically established adaptation of the divine name for English speakers. It's presented as linguistic consistency.
That definitely gives you something to think about, applying the same standard to both names. Fascinating stuff.
It really is a complex intersection of language, history, and faith.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope exploring these arguments around Jehovah has been insightful for you, our listeners. As always, keep digging, keep asking questions. See you next time.